JP Lutz, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on the show. You're an assistant professor of practice. You're specializing in business marketing, sports management at St. Joseph University. Also, a lot of working experience from the sport industry. So, a lot to uncover today.
Yeah, I think I bring a different perspective of sport in that I worked in professional sports for over 15 years, and then today I've worked in higher ed for over 10 years, and I'm also an entrepreneur owning my own sports business.
So, you have done it all. You have worked for a business, you have had your own business, and been teaching as well.
Yeah, jack of all trade, master of none, I guess, in some ways. But yeah, no, I think in many ways, and I know we'll get into sort of my career path a little bit. I think my pathway into sports and then in now into higher ed, I think is just a is a result of sort of the mindset of always saying yes to things. And I've been very fortunate in my career that I've had great opportunities in sport and then also now in higher ed.
Awesome. So your career has spanned roles with professional sports teams like Philadelphia Eagles, youth and communal sports, academia, and your own businesses, as we said. What core beliefs or values have remained with you throughout?
That's it's a great question. There's certain characteristics I think I've always just inherently have had. Just by the way I grew up, I've always, even my parents always instilled in me just working hard, doing everything to your best of your ability. Not to mean that every time you're going to be successful, you're going to fail, but as long as you gave it your best effort, and I think I just always took that approach. I also think I'm also a person. I think some of my personality is I'm at my best when I'm busiest. When I'm plugged in and when I've got 10 different things going on at the same time, it's oftentimes when I'm my sharpest, and it's oftentimes when I'm my most productive. And so, I don't know if that was just sort of the way I sort of grew up, but certainly the sports industry led to that because it's fast paced. It's 24/7. It's nights and weekends, and so with that experience in professional sports where there is no real work life balance. And that's a challenge in that industry, and it's certainly a challenge of what's going on today in the sports world. But for me, growing up into it, in the late '90s, early 2000s, there was no balance, but I was okay with that because I loved what I did. I loved where I was at, and it just now it's just become a part of who my identity is. So I take the same approach now working in higher education where I have a tremendous amount of flexibility. It's like a newfound freedom that I never thought I'd ever have. With friends and family, we always joke that I went from literally from one extreme to the other. But what higher ed has really provided me is an opportunity to really get involved in a lot of different areas and still stay relevant in the sports industry.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. As you said, when you're educating, you need to stay on top of things, right? And you said that you like to keep busy, and it's this saying that if you want something done, ask a busy man. So,
You're right. Yeah, you
and
don't you don't have time to put anything. I don't have time to procrastinate or put anything aside. I'm a very sort of I guess in some ways I've always been a person that gets energized by crossing off that item on your to-do list and just getting things done. And I'm very I guess maybe a tactical approach to working, and I've always been that way. So, even to this day, if I come in to begin my week, to begin my day, I'm writing down, just taking it, even if it's just a couple minutes in the morning, just taking down the things that I need to do, and that keeps me on track and it keeps me focused, and I just and it energizes me in many ways.
I love it. And you mentioned work-life balance, and sports is tricky that way, right? Because the border between passion and work sometimes gets a bit blurry because a lot
Mhm.
of us that works in sports, this is also our passion. And you mentioned there are no real work-life balance, but how have you been handling that in your career?
Well, you know what? Again, I think it also depends on when you bring up the sort of the concept of work-life balance, especially in sport. If you're fortunate enough to get into sports in your early 20s, you have a lot of flexibility and freedom. As you get older, and certainly as I got into my 30s and now my 40s, uh, you know, there became other personal issues that now you start to prioritize differently than you did a decade prior. And so that concept, first starting out my career, uh, it didn't mean anything, right? Oh, you want me to work on the weekends? Okay. You want me to work at night? Okay. You want me to go to this? You want me to travel? Okay. Like everything was yes, 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 yes. I'll do whatever I could and however I could help. And that was always sort of my mantra in terms of, I'm never going to say no to anything. Because there's a reason why I'm being asked to do something. Um, and as long as I'm helping provide value and helping provide support, I think that's always a good opportunity and a good mindset. I tell my students now today, I said, look, say no, don't say no to anything. If you get a volunteer opportunity, a chance to work on campus, chance to help out, one of your professors on a project, the answer should always be yes, because you just never know where that opportunity is going to lead you to the next.
Exactly, I love that. And I've talked about like creating your own luck, and that's what you said there. If you're saying yes to things, that might lead to something that leads to something great.
Yeah, and that's look, the biggest challenge in everybody wants to work in sports, right? And I deal now with, hundreds of students here at St. Joe's University, and all of them come into this major have with a passion for sports and the desire to want to work in this industry for their career. And I always tell them, I said, look, you got to realize that some of this is going to be luck. Now, the key is are you positioning yourself to get lucky, right? It's like the guy who says, well, how come I never win the lottery? I said, well, did you ever buy a ticket? Right? It's kind of that idea that you need to create your own luck. And the way that happens is by getting involved. I had a mentor, early on in my career, a mentor had said something to me like, JP, the more you can do, the more you can do. And I kind of was like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, that makes sense, right? But so even in like my early years of college, right? It's the, hey, we need somebody to stand in for the mascot, right? I had no interest in being a mascot. I had no interest in wearing this ridiculous costume, but the answer was sure, no problem. I'll figure it out. I'll make it work, and we'll go from there. And so, I try to instill that into my students. At the same time, it's just that, look, if you understand that part of getting an opportunity in sports is going to be luck, then you need to put yourself in those positions. And the way you can do that is getting involved any way you can, network, meet people, and you never know where that one interaction, that one opportunity will lead you to the next. And certainly I've been a testament to that in my career.
And what are some advice that you can give on this topic? How to network? Is it being on LinkedIn or taking on internship opportunities, or how can they do that to create their own luck?
Great question. And so, in fact, I just had this conversation with one of my classes last week, and I always ask right at the end of the semester. I always ask, my sports marketing students. I said, "Do you believe that it's not what you know, it's who you know?" And when every time I ask that question, I get the majority of people raising their hands saying, "Yes, that's what they believe." Right? And we use that phrase in America, and we use that phrase loosely, almost to sound like it's a negative, right? Like certain people have advantages over others. And I've always taken the mindset that if you truly believe it's not what you know, it's who you know, then what do you need to go do? What do you need to do? You need to go out and meet people. I mean, it kind of breaks it down in those simplest terms that if you do believe that, then your job is to go out and meet people. And so you have to take advantage of every opportunity. Now, we're very fortunate here at St. Joe's that we have sort of, we have built-in network. Our professors here on campus bring in guest speakers and lecturers, and a lot of our adjuncts are actively working in industry. So we have sort of a nice sort of built-in network here in Philadelphia. But I will tell you that it's those students that take initiative, right? The ones that take initiative to attend these events, the ones that go and reach out on LinkedIn. I said the easiest pathway, and part of and now knowing this because I've been on the other side of it where, students were reaching out to me at one time saying, "Hey, can we set up a 10-minute informational interview? Can we talk? Can we meet up for coffee?" And the answer, whenever a student reached out to me, like on LinkedIn or blindly emailed me, the answer was, yeah, let's figure out a time that works for both of us. And it was always sort of this, because I think at some point, anybody that's actively working in sports was where they're at some point, right? They were in that same position where they're trying to network, they're trying to meet people, and they're trying to get that sort of their foot in the door. And so it's almost kind of like a pay it forward type of approach, where I think most sports industry professionals are willing to give up some time. But what I found is that most college students don't want to take the initiative. They don't want to get out of their comfort zone, and unfortunately, I hate to say, I kind of sound like the old guy in the, telling you to get off my lawn, but I think that in some ways, this generation of young adults are too dependent on smartphones and technology, and they don't know how to pick up the phone. They don't know how to go out and meet somebody in person, and it's so far removed from their sort of their comfort zone that it's almost crippling when I ask them to do these things. And so slowly and surely, what I try to do along the way in the program here is push them so that they understand that part of this, if you say it's luck, and part of this is the importance of networking, then they need to go out and do this stuff. Because if they're not going to fight for themselves, they're certainly not going to fight for a company that they're going to work for.
Exactly. And I heard Dana White, the president of the UFC, he was saying something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, but if you're even remotely a savage, you will run all of these kids over because, as you said, they are not willing to go that extra mile. But what that also means is that if you do that, there is less competition now because there's less people doing it. So you haven't just reaching out, as you said, pick up the phone, meet that person, then you're 10 steps ahead of everyone already.
The hardest part for the hardest part for a college student looking to break into the sports industry is just a demand. All right, it's such a limited industry where job opportunities, you never know when and where and how they're going to become available, and then when they do, the demand in terms of the number of applications is so high that you have to be able to break through the clutter some way, and you have to be able to, and some of that is doing all of that work before you need it. You know what I mean? And so I think it's the students that sort of take that mindset that I'm going to build my network and meet people before I need to call on them about a job, as opposed to doing it, being reactive to it. Let's be proactive to, let's try to build our network and build, genuine relationships. It's not just always about, what you can do for me. It's more about, I'm here to learn and understand what you're doing, but then also figure out ways that I can bring value to your job or your property.
Yeah. And I think you're only like, what are you, 4 degrees of separation away from anybody on the world, something like that. So, I mean, this podcast is a perfect example. I started knowing nobody. It's not like I was Barack Obama podcast and you have the network. I had 0. And then you talk to someone that's how we're talking now. Someone said you should talk to JP. Now we're talking. So,
Yeah.
I mean, just getting started, and then that will amplify after someone recommends you to someone else and onward.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I've always said that the sports industry is a sort of a small fraternity or sorority, however you want to say it, of people that work in it. And in Philadelphia, if you're familiar with sort of the culture of Philadelphia, I've always said that Philadelphia is a big city with a small town mentality, and so it's even smaller in Philadelphia. So not only do you can you are you one, or you might only be 1 or 2 degrees separated in Philadelphia, right? And so the importance of, hey, your dream job may be to work for the Eagles, but maybe that first internship is with another sports property. I guarantee that when you take on that job, you're going to meet 3 or 4 different people that either work there or know people that work there. It's so it's such a small community, and it just, again, it gets back to the same thing we discussed earlier. Just go in there, work hard, do as much as you can. Don't say no to anything, because I know that this first job might not be where you want to be, but it might get you to that next place that is.
Exactly. So for someone who has been in higher ed as you and also worked on the other side, if you want to say that, in the real world, how important is education in order to get a job in the sports industry?
I think, look, I think it's very important, actually. Now the argument is always, do I need to major? What do I need to major in? Do I need to major in a sports management or sports marketing? So at St. Joe's here, it's a specialized program, and it's absolutely geared towards that student that knows they want to work on the business side or the revenue generating side of sports, right? And so it's more focused, and that's really what I like about our program at St. Joe's. So I do think, yes, I do think you need a degree. And then I think one of the things you also need to have an understanding is what jobs are out there, what types of roles are essential, and that's continuing to evolve, right? You know, I when I left professional sports, most teams here in the U.S. probably either had one or no one dedicated to social media. And now you take a look at any front office on the business side, they have an entire department dedicated towards it, right? And so I think understanding that there's going to be, and I think in many ways the sports industry is an early adopter, especially with technology, as the way that fans consume content now differently than they did 5-10 years ago. The same way that we watch and want to interact with sports is continuing to evolve. The jobs now are changing as well. And so if you understand those opportunities, I think education can provide you with those hard skills that are essential, right? And so, and I'll give you an example. Today, a lot of my students are interested in data analytics and CRM. And so they come to St. Joe's as a sports marketing major, and then quickly learn that they want to get on the data side or the business analytics side of the sports. And what we can end up doing is pairing them with a what we call a DSS, a decision science degree, which then gives them all of that hard skills on different analytics tools, programs, CRM. And so now they have that along with the understanding of the business of sports, and it really pairs nicely. And so, yeah, I know that's a long way of saying, yeah, I'm still a believer in education, even when some industries say you don't need a degree. I still believe that college degrees, in order for this to work in sports, I think is essential.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. It's just I feel nowadays a lot of like it's maybe especially in the US since it's expensive to go to many colleges that they use college is a scam and that you don't need it to get a job and you hear those things, right? But I mean, I went to uni and I feel like I definitely benefited from that. So it's on the other hand, I think I like to promote that all roads could lead to the sport industry, and I think that was a good point that you brought up, that you don't have to study sports management, but to study something that will give you an edge in your career later on.
Yeah, again, I didn't know it at the time, so I was, when I was an undergrad, many, many moons ago, I they didn't have sports marketing or sports management degrees. I was just a business major that was sort of figuring out what I wanted to do for my career, and the way that I figured it out was through process of elimination. So after I took my first accounting class, I go, yeah, no, that's not going to be my path. And then I took my first finance class, and I'm like, no, I don't want to do that for my career. And then I took my first marketing class, and that's when sort of the light bulb went off. And then I was very lucky that the relationship, and this is where relationships really matter in higher ed, the relationships that the university had already formed with some of the sports properties in Philadelphia allowed me then that opportunity to get that first internship. And so that really was a benefit to me, because that's where, I started working as a sophomore. I started working as, at it's no longer there, but Veteran Stadium, which was the home of the Phillies and the Eagles. And so it was through that experience that then got me into that system, which then allowed me to then move through quickly, where then I took an internship, a post-grad internship, and then it was a full-time job. And so what I didn't know this back then, but I recognized the fact that the university did bring value because of those relationships that they had in place and those alumni that were there to help support it.
Yeah, for sure. So let's jump into your story. We go back to those many moons ago when you were in uni. You took that internship. You got your foot into the sports industry. Where did you go on from there?
So my first job in sports was 1998. I was working elevators and taking tickets back when they used to have hard tickets. If you remember, a hard ticket. And like I said, I worked at Veteran Stadium. Um, for a sophomore, a 20-year-old kid, I knew right away as soon as I worked my first game, and my first game was probably either a Phillies game in the summer or spring or summer, or an Eagles game in the fall. And can't quite remember exactly, but I remember the feeling of what that was like to be part of the event. I just remember just sort of that, I don't know, I call it sort of this magic of game day. It's this beautiful chaos that it's hard to describe. As a fan, we know it, right? You know it when you go, and you know it when you sit in the stands and you're watching and you feel the energy of the crowd. But when you're on the other side of it, where you're working and providing that product to the fan, it's just it's a different perspective and a different experience. And I always tell the student, you're going to know right away whether you're going to love it or you're going to hate it, whether you can enjoy. And I don't even necessarily enjoy it. And no one enjoys customers' problems, right? No one enjoys customer complaints. But if you understand it, you can empathize, meaning putting yourself in the shoe of that fan, and being able to figure out a solution to that problem. You can have a long career in sports. And I was able to do that. And I knew right away, like, wow, this is where I want my career to go. And so it was just something as simple as a part-time job. Again, something as maybe as you would say as minor as working an elevator or taking a ticket. Just opened up those possibilities for me. And so I, that job led me to other opportunities through internships at what was called the Wells Fargo Center. Now it's called Xfinity Mobile Arena. So I worked there for 1 year. I stayed in premium services with the Eagles. And then I graduated from college, and when all my friends were recruited in the fall of their senior year and had job offers and big signing bonuses, I graduated with really just saying, I don't know where I'm going to go. And I remember just continuing to hustle. And I remember going it reminds me of what I see the students doing today. Literally, it's like I'm watching a movie with different actors, but I know how the movie ends, and I'm trying to keep them on the same path. Like, you're doing the right things. Just keep doing what you're doing. Um, but when so that year I graduated, um, I got a post grad opportunity to work for the Eagles, pretty much a full time position. So it was a full time position, and I remember I remember coming home and I said to my mom, I said, Mom, I've got good news and I've got bad news. And she said, I said, which one do you want first? And she said, oh, of course, I want the good news. And I said, well, Mom, I just got hired full time by the Eagles. And she said, oh my God, what could possibly be the bad news? And I said, Mom, I'm making $5 an hour and I got to move back home. And that was true. But I went in there with that opportunity. I went in there with the mindset that I'm gonna work hard. I'm gonna give it my all. And this was my shot. This was my chance to get to start my career, and it really was. And then that led me to working for the team for 13 years. I was very lucky that I was somebody that I was able to move around to different departments during my tenure at the Eagles. So I started my career in working in what I would consider customer service or account management. I then moved into ticket operations. So I worked in the stadium, in stadium ops and ticket ops. And then I ended my tenure at the Eagles working in sales. So I was in premium sales, selling luxury suites and club seats. And then so when I left the Eagles, I actually I started to dip my toe in the water with higher ed. You know, I always say, you know, I have a family full of teachers. Both my parents are retired school teachers, and I don't know if it's in your blood a little bit or not, but I was always interested in it, and I always was getting involved with guest speaking and being on all the local campuses, and I really just enjoyed it. And I thought it was just a great way to give back. And at the time, for me, it was a great way to meet potential interns and students, right? So I was also using it for recruiting purposes as well. Um, but when I left the Eagles, I started doing some adjunct work at some of the local universities, and uh, so I immediately loved it. I immediately thought, wow, this could be my next career path. Um, but there was also part of me that missed the sports side of it and missed the team side and missed all of that camaraderie and the game day experience and everything that sort of is what it means to work in a front office of a team. And so I had an opportunity to go back into sports through the Arena Football League, and I worked for the Philadelphia Soul for a short period of time, and I was the director of sponsorship sales. So I was doing different type of sale where I was working with companies to advertise and doing naming rights deals and those sort of things. You know, looking back on it, it was a wonderful experience and perspective. You know, going from a large property like an NFL, where arguably is the biggest sports property in the U.S., to then working in the Arena Football League, which was very much a minor league sport in terms of the resources and revenues that they were able to generate. And so it gave me a really different perspective on sports as a whole. But I also realized that through that experience with the Soul, I realized that teaching was going to be the next pathway. And so I ended up, you know, going, you know, and again, this is now taking sort of, 15 years later, now going back into that same position I was at, just graduating from college, going, well, how do I get hired if I don't get experience? And how do I get experience if I don't get hired? And that's kind of where I was at. And so my mindset was always, I'm gonna do anything I can in higher education. And so I lost track, but I think I think the last time I calculated it, I taught at about 7 different schools. So where there was an adjunct opportunity, I remember the one the one school, and it was a wonderful school. It was a small school out in Delaware, and it was they had accelerated courses, and it was only like a 7 week course. And I, I I remember by the time it cost me in gas and tolls to get to this college, and then the taxes they took out afterwards, I ended up owing them money. Um, but it was just a great example of, again, I started to get into this where, as, as we talked about, networking, meeting people, doing it when, building those relationships when you don't need them. And all of those things helped me along the way. And so those people that I volunteered and did guest speaking, they're the ones that gave me opportunities to be adjunct. And so I was doing the adjunct work for about 5 years. I worked wherever they would hire me, and if you know anything about adjunct work, it's pretty much contract work in that it's short term, pays not very great, and you don't get any benefits. And so at that time in my life, I needed to keep the lights on in the house. I needed to pay my mortgage, and so that actually was how I started my own business. So it was out of necessity, as a way to supplement my income, and it was I always tell people it was a side hustle before that was a term. And now, 10 years later, with my business, I have a full retail store, and an online component, which it started out as, and we have employees, and it's been a wonderful sort of side project and passion project that pairs really nicely with my teaching schedule. So I think that goes over, I guess, the main points, I hope.
For sure, for sure. And it's a great story, and I'd love to hear the your career journey and how agile you have been and willing to do many things. Like you, as you said, you have worked in operations, sales, marketing, tickets, all of this. So what is, I mean, the skill sets that you need, or the habits, or the like your mentality to be able to do so many different things? What would you think is the key for that?
Well, I think there in different roles, there's different skill sets that are necessary. And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to consider, I think you need to consider the soft skills that you possess that are just who you are, what's your DNA and what's your makeup, right? So your ability to work with others, your ability to be a leader, but also be coached. Your ability to work with a team in a team setting, but then also take on projects and be independent when you need to be independent. All of those soft skills, some of that stuff you're just born with, and some of it you can develop. And then I think that, the technical things, you just have to be, look, learning, in operations, it was about learning technology and learning a ticketing system, and continuing to just learn about how to be able to manage a process as opposed to managing people. So, I've been very lucky that I've been able to do a lot of these things. And, but I ultimately think, and I look back on all of the different jobs that I've had and all of the different types of industries I've worked in. Um, a lot of it has boiled down to just relationships, right? Treating people the way you want to be treated, taking care of people the way you would want to be taken care of, and just doing things the right way. I always had a mantra when I worked in sports that I first had to do what was best for the organization. I then had to do what was best for the customer, and then my personal needs were third in that order, because I knew if I did things the right way, where I took care of the organization, I took care of my customers, all my needs would have been met. And I think where sometimes, people run into some challenges in sports is that sometimes your personal interests are above one of those. And that's where I think you sometimes you either find yourself in bad situations, or if you are in a situation where your needs are above, which I'm not, again, I'd never say that you don't have to take care of yourself or stand up for yourself, but your needs if that's your priority, then you got to really reevaluate, I think, is if sports is where you want to be, because the demands are so high, and what you need to sacrifice in order to be successful, is a lot. And then in many ways, the industry is built on hospitality and customer relationships. So that's at the end of the day, you know, it's a product, and yes, it's a sporting event, and there's different types of sports and live entertainment, but ultimately it's a hospitality industry.
Hmm. It's an interesting angle because usually you hear like the airplane analogy that if the air pressure goes down and the mass comes down, you should take your own first because so you can help others after. So then it's more like you need to be taking care of yourself so that you can take care of others. But you have flipped that around a little bit.
Yeah, I well that's just been that's been my mantra. That's just the way that I've sort of taken that approach, understanding that, look, the organization always comes first, right? So, I will would never do anything to put the organization, and even to this day, any of the schools that I've worked at, the school comes first. The needs of the school come first. Then the students are second, and it has to be that way. So, and if you do it the right way, I think then you take care of all the things that you want as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting take for sure. Has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's always bumps in the road. There's always going to be failure, and there's always going to be, and I certainly have had my share of challenges in sports. I've certainly had my share of, if you want to call them bumps in the road. I really think it all depends on how you react to those. How do you learn? How do you grow? How do you reflect back on, the situation? And ultimately, when things, look, I always think that when there's a difficult situation, or something goes wrong, in an employer situation, um, it's usually there's contributing factors that happen, and you can't go and blame one party or another. I think you always have to look back at yourself and say, what could I have done differently? What should I have done differently? What can I learn from this? And so that the next time this comes open, I'm going to know how to handle it in a better way. And I think that's just part of your, professional development and growth, as an individual. We use the term, emotional intelligence today as sort of a buzzword. But really, ultimately, it's just, for me, it's just treating people the way that you want to be treated, and doing things the right way. And as long as you can do that, I think you can have a long, successful career. But there will be bumps in the road. There will be challenges. That's sports. Most people think that sports is this glamorous industry, where what they see on TV is just the reality. And then you get into it and you realize, whoa, this is really what it's like. But that's part of the game.
Definitely. And as you said, it's not the bumps, it's how you move on from them.
Yeah.
You've had some bumps, if you call them that, in your personal life as well with your health quite recently, I think. So, how has that been affecting you and moving forward?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you. I appreciate you bringing that up. And so, yeah, I tell you, and it's interesting. So I and we get back to the idea of relationships. Um, and so one of my first friends that I made, so one of the first friendships that I made when I started working at the Eagles, was a gentleman who worked in our accounting department, and he was, as you go sort of full circle, um, he was actually a St. Joe's alum, and was, so when I left the Eagles, we stayed in touch. But life gets busy, right? Families and things get busy, but he was one of the first real sort of cheerleaders to when he found out that I was now teaching at St. Joe's, and was sort of that point of being able to reconnect. And he was one of the first people I brought back onto campus, and he was always willing to volunteer his time and do things and to give back. And he was just a tremendous guy that worked hard, but also gave back to the community and kids. And he was just a great guy and somebody that's, like I said, was one of my first sort of friends that I made, personal friends that I made at the Eagles. And unfortunately, he passed away at 46 of cancer. And I was at his celebration of life event, and it was at the stadium. And I remember saying to the folks the folks that were there at attendee, I said, this is like a class reunion that nobody wants to be at, because it was just amazing that just his legacy and the people that he touched. So many people came out in hordes. You would have thought you were at a game. The amount of people that came to this thing. And I remember saying to myself, God, I'm now the same age as him. And so I just said to myself, I said, it was the summer of 2024. I said, I just got to be proactive in my health. And so what I did, I went to my primary doctor and the system with me, I went to my doctor and did a routine checkup and said, Doc, I'm 46. What should I do? I got a family history of heart disease. She said, go to a cardiologist. I said, should I, go get my prostate looked at? She said, go get a colonoscopy. And I said, okay, that's just kind of what we do in our 40s now. This is like just being proactive. And still to this day, I never had one symptom. But I went in August of 2024. Had a colonoscopy and discovered that I had colon cancer, and so I was at Penn for the entire treatment. Felt very comfortable there. They streamlined me, and again, it's we've all had bad phone calls, in our life, and that's sort of the reality of life, is that you're going to get bad phone calls and there's going to be difficult times. But I've never experienced anything like that phone call when they tell you have cancer, and it's a crazy sort of experience in that it's this wave of emotions, and it's like this. At the same time, it's like this white noise that comes over you, and it's just I really don't know how to describe it, but until you go through it, it's really hard to understand it. But I was very lucky in that I caught it extremely early, and because I was proactive in getting getting my health checked out, I was able to go in for surgery. So I had a major surgery to remove part of my colon, and by the grace of God, it was isolated. It hadn't spread, and last August, I had my one year checkup, and the doctor who performed my surgery did the checkup, and I've got a clean bill of health. And so when I left the hospital, she said, "I'll see you in 2 years." And and so to reflect back and say where I was at 2 years ago then a year later is amazing, and I tell people all the time I'm the luckiest guy in the world, and I said that after Bill Walton had said he's the luckiest guy in the world. I said, well, Bill, I'm also in that category, pal, and I'm very blessed that and I don't take for granted how lucky I am. People that are dealing with this every day have much longer roads than I had. And are dealing with much different situations, and I just take it now. I take it now as an opportunity for me to be an advocate, to help raise awareness, to help raise money towards research, and I'll continue to do that. And so I stay active in the community now. So any organizations that I can either get a part of or get behind, I'm doing it, and I'm excited. This will be my second year working with the Colon Cancer Coalition. And they've got a big gala coming up in the beginning of 2026. So I'm excited to that, and really just being an advocate. And I tell anybody over 45, go get checked up. There's no downside; it's only upside, and I'm living proof of it. But
Definitely.
I
Wow.
appreciate you asking.
Yeah, what an amazing story. And yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how that was like. But again, like call it lucky, or I mean, you were proactive, and yeah, could have been so much worse. But yeah,
Yeah,
I'm so glad that you're good.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, going through this process, you have a lot of questions, and it's there's a lot of emotions that go through it. And I remember asking the oncologist at one point. I said, "So what would happen if I came a year earlier?" And she says, "I don't know." She says, "But what I can tell you is that if you came a year later, we might be having a much different conversation and treatment plan." And so, again, that just it just taught me that, again, you need to realize that, as we get older and, things change, you need to be proactive in your health. And again, yeah, I'm just very, 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 very lucky. And I really, in kind of a way, I kind of owe it to my friend who wasn't that fortunate, but really opened up my eyes to the seriousness of this. And now I have an opportunity now to give back and help other people, and it's not something I take lightly.
No, I love that. It's hard to bounce back now to the to sports. It seems seems trivial after talking about life and death. But you mentioned that when you're teaching, you're keeping up with the news and what's happening in the world of sports. So looking forward, if what are some trends? What's something that you think will be extra important in the sports business going forward?
Well, look again. If I'm looking to break into sports um, today, as opposed to 20 years ago, I'm now I'm looking at analytics. I'm looking at getting the experience in any kind of data, whether it's CRMs, Python, any kind of analytics tools. If you're not, as a now as even as an educator, if you're not embracing AI, you're behind. And so, I take this approach now in my class that, look, my students want to use AI. Okay, let's use it, but let's use it responsibly, and let's figure out a way to use it the right way. You're not just plugging in a prompt and claiming it as your own. Let's use it as a way to gather information and to make things simpler and easier and better. But now I'm looking at, I'd be looking at how AI is going to change the way we sell tickets, the way we deal with customers, all of this, and so that's an area where I would be trying to get as much experience in that as I can. um and it's just, I think it's always, for me, now looking back on it, it's such a competitive marketplace. And what I would tell students to continue to do is find ways to add value through transferable skills. Look at what skills and I always refer to them as hard skills. What hard skills do you need to be successful in certain roles, and go out and get them. And if that means that you're going to go, manage the social media accounts for a law firm while you're in school part time, go do it. You're helping build your portfolio and building your skill set. And so that, and then the other thing I would say, which I didn't really think about this until I needed to, but the idea of starting your own business, right? Being an entrepreneur and starting your own sports business, right? You can find your own niche very easily and have a lot of resources today than you used to than you used to have. Um, most students that I work with have this sort of tunnel vision that they can only work for the four or five major leagues in this country, where the reality is that jobs in collegiate athletics, agency sides, the corporate side that's using sports to market themselves, recreational. These all can be great career paths. So you have to sort of be open to the idea of what are you going to enjoy and where are you going to find fulfillment. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in those four professional sports leagues. It can be starting your own business and finding a niche and just being able to manage that and to work in that area.
Definitely. So, talking about side gigs and side businesses, we didn't really dig into yours. So, it's a vintage sports clothing and collectible business, right?
Correct.
So, tell us a little bit more about it. What's it called? What do you do?
Yeah, great. So the name of the business is called Bucks County Baseball Company. It's a deceiving name. We specialize in all sports, primarily vintage clothing and vintage collectibles. Um, as I mentioned, I started it as a side hustle, really just on an observation. Besides sports, I'm also an avid music guy, and I go to a lot of concerts. And one summer, I recognized a trend in fashion that I noticed that a lot of young adults were wearing jerseys or kits uh, of, of of things that I had when I was in the 80s and 90s. And so they were wearing these vintage jerseys and representing these vintage teams or players. And I just said, wow, this is really interesting that this is from a fashion trend is now a thing. I said, I can go get these. I can go find these. I can go populate these things. I've got the time. And and so what started out as just sort of um, kind of a hobby that made money and so to speak, where I had to just figure out how to source these things. And I was doing and selling it online. I started it just as an online component through our website and through other sales sources. Um, but I was doing it out of the basement of my house. And I quickly realized that I had a basement full of jerseys, and my kitchen table was a fulfillment center with packing materials and tape and bubble wrap and corrugated boxes. And I said, "Oh my God, I got to figure this out." And I ended up moving my stuff into what was at the time an empty store front that was being renovated, and 10 years later, that became my brick and mortar location. And never in my wildest dreams have I thought I was going to have a full retail store. I only ever really wanted an online business. But the online store has now morphed into a full brick and mortar. I call it an experiential sort of retail store in that it is an absolute celebration of Philadelphia sports. It's artifacts and collectibles of things that were from my personal collection and my father's personal collection that we've sort of incorporated. And so when you come into the store, it's almost like a museum that just pairs with a retail, and it's become a really kind of a really unique place, and become a destination for a lot of people in the community. And so it's been great. I wouldn't say it's absolutely a passion project, and but I love the fact that my breaks in my teaching schedule pair nicely with the store. And so when I'm off from winter break, it's when we're preparing for holiday shopping. In the summertime, when I'm not teaching, I'm doing a lot of my capital or big projects for the year in that short period of time. And so it's kind of this interesting sort of jigsaw puzzle that it sort of now all came together. Um, and the thing that I love about it is that I can control it, right? And so when we talk about all of the pitfalls of working in sport with work-life balance and hours, I work just as many hours as I did 20 years ago, but I own it, right? I own it. I control it. I'm incentivized that the harder I work, the more money I make, the better my business does. And so for me, that is it's a responsibility, but it also gives me freedom. Whereas if I want to go away with my wife, I go away with my wife. If I want to, if I need to not go in on a day, I know that that means I'll make it up at some other time, at night or some other time next week. So it's given me a lot of flexibility in that regard, which is really been a blessing for me.
I understand that, and I love side gigs and side businesses and passion projects. As you said, this podcast is a passion project of mine, and I think that all students can. It's also good for the CV, something they can show in their next job if they pick up something beside their studies or early work.
Yeah, great, and that's look. That's a great example too. Is when a student says to me, JP, I want to work in communications. I want to work in PR. I want to work, or in the sports media world. I say, okay, great. What are you doing? Well, I said, well, why don't you start a podcast? Why don't you start a blog? Why don't you have the ability to do all this stuff? Find a topic that's interesting for people, and then you try to build it. And you're absolutely right. It's gonna improve your CV, improve your experiences. You have a whole new area and you never know. I'm sure you feel the same way, that you just never know where this podcast is going to go, right? This podcast, you just never know where this may be this may be your primary job at one point, and that's realistic. It's not unrealistic to think that way.
Definitely. So yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Is there something I haven't asked you yet that you want to mention?
No, I don't think so. No, I think for me, again, I think for me, if not anything, I think I'm an example of someone who's really said yes to everything, followed my gut and followed my heart, and believed um, that that I was going to do what I believed that had value and could make a difference and help people. I've always taken that approach. I've always, even to this day, in my core, I believe that I'm helping people, and I'm helping students now get opportunities to work in a field that I had so many great memories in, and so, in many ways, this doesn't feel like work for me. Right. In many ways, I know the way I'm built, that unless I'm doing something that I have this kind of passion for, uh, it's going to be hard for me to get up in the morning. I don't have that problem, and I guess I've been, like I said, I've been very fortunate that I've been able to build a career around these passion projects and around this love of sports, because that's always been at the core of everything I've done. But yeah, so I always tell a student, and I would tell anybody listening to this podcast, do what you love, follow your heart, never always say yes to things, and you just never know where one opportunity is going to lead you to the next.
Amazing advice. I like to end on a networking question. We have talked a lot about
Sure.
networking, and this was also how you got on this podcast. So, who from your network do you think would be a good guest on this show?
Who from my network would be a good guest on the show? Um, I'm gonna. I'll tell you exact. I'll tell you. So I'm gonna give you. So the guy that I would recommend that you talk to is a gentleman by the name of Mark Gress, from Prodigy Search. Mark has been a long friend of mine. In fact, we worked together at the Eagles. But Mark now is a partner in an executive search firm that works in sports and entertainment. Been doing more projects in esports as of late, but absolutely sort of the primary sports. And he does high level executive searches. But Mark's got a really interesting background in that even now he's working in sports, but it's on the sort of the recruiting side, which is very niche. But his background has always been in higher ed, in professional sports, and he's been a kind of we're in many ways, Mark and I are kind of cut from the same cloth. But I think he's got an interesting perspective, and could give you some really good advice on the pulse of the current sports industry, the needs of what these properties that are actively looking to hire, and just has a unique take on it in that he's got a lot of different and a really diverse background in sports.
That's an amazing guest suggestion. Thank you so much.
And I'm happy to connect you with him. I'm happy to connect you with him or make an intro if you need it. Not a problem.
Thanks so much. JP, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you for having me. If I can be of any help, please let me know. But good luck with everything, and hopefully we'll be able to stay in touch.
For sure. Thank you.